Okay, welcome everyone. It is so great to see all of you. I wanted us to start out in gallery view just so we could see each other because today's event is really going to be a really informal conversation after we hear the demo from our colleagues at the Brookings Institute. Again, my name is Parag Mehta. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Inclusive Growth. We are the philanthropic arm of Mastercard, and we're so pleased to welcome you to this special meeting to do a demo of a tool that we've been investing a lot of time and energy and thought into. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. Because this is going to be a small group today, and we've intentionally kept this an intimate experience so we can have interaction, we're going to encourage folks to turn on their video and edit your names in Zoom so that it has your first name, your last name, and the organization that you represent. So you can see mine as an example of how to edit your names on Zoom. And also, when you logged in, you might have gotten a message noting that this event is being recorded. So just please keep that in mind as you participate in the conversation, that we are recording this, and we're going to make the recording available to some of the folks who couldn't make it to the event today. Now, before I introduce our guests, I just want to say that we at the Center for Inclusive Growth, like a lot of folks across the private sector and philanthropy, have been really focused on the future of work and really the future of workers. And while we have been thinking about that issue, we conducted a landscape analysis to ask some of the smartest people we know what they thought about it. And the most common question I would ask these people is, what jobs are going to survive? Can you predict in the future what jobs will look like, which jobs will still be around, and which jobs won't? And the person who was best able to answer that question is our guest of honor today. Marcela Escobari is a friend of mine, a former colleague from the Obama administration, and a former fellow of ours at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. And her wisdom to me was, to understand the future of work, you have to look at the past of work. You have to look at the pathways for mobility that have helped workers move to better jobs, better paying jobs, better quality jobs. And so she has taken that knowledge and she has taken data insights from across multiple data sources to produce this incredible tool that provides great insights about how workers can improve their economic situation. Today, Marcela is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and she's joined by her colleague, Ian Sale. They both work at the Workforce for the Future initiative, which links economic and workforce development to empower local governments with actionable data and enable them to chart a path to grow and help workers prosper in times of change. We're so proud as Mastercard to have been supporting this work along with our partners at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also at google.org. Now, real quickly, before joining Brookings, Marcela was the executive director of Harvard University's Center for International Development, another partner of ours, which works on breakthrough ideas to eradicate poverty. She also served as the head of the Latin American Bureau at USAID under President Obama's administration. Ian comes to us with a wealth of experience in economics and international development, and we're excited to have him share the demo of the tool with us and some insights about how you can use it. Now, this afternoon, as Marcela and Ian discuss their latest findings on economic mobility, findings which, by the way, have not been published yet, so you're getting a sneak preview, they're also going to show you this new online visualization tool. And what we hope to be able to do is demo it in about 20 minutes and then spend most of our time together in an interactive discussion and Q&A about how to make these insights valuable and useful to you. So please feel free to engage with us in the chat, say hello to one another, pose questions, and get ready for the Q&A and discussion section. And with that, I am so pleased to turn it over to Marcela Escobari.
Thank you, Parag. I wish you would always introduce me. You always make me sound so smart. Let me see.
Maybe that's the future of my work, Marcela.
Deal. Let me see if this works.
Perfect.
Work? Yeah?
Yep, you look great. We can see you.
All right, awesome. Great. Well, it's great to see you all, and very thankful to Parag and Mastercard for the idea of this gathering. And again, thankful for many of those in the room who are partners and supporters. Both Mastercard along with Gates and google.org have allowed us to really have a growing research agenda that builds on itself and is able to be responsive to folks on the ground with ever more complete data, which is a bit of our goal. So Ian and I are going to try to cover two topics. One is early findings from our upcoming report on economic mobility, and also the mobility pathway online tool. which, by the way, was inspired by a conference like this organized by google.org, where we met Wendy from Goodwill, which I don't know if she's made it in, but I saw her in the list, where we tested this idea. And she said it would be great to have something for her coaches at Goodwill that would help them see around the corner and see what occupations are likely to grow, decline, and that is geared toward low-wage workers. And hopefully we're getting close to that. So, so I also hope to show a bit of how a different way to look at the labor market that I hope can give funders ideas of where to focus in a way that can have outsized returns. So I'm going to briefly state the problem, which all of you in this room already know, right? Which is that for the last half a century, the labor market has been bifurcating with a growing set of high-wage jobs with stability and mobility and benefits. And on the other side, low-wage jobs where folks tend to churn without mobility, stability, and often dignity, right? And it means that many people were giving up. And this was even before the pandemic. We're at some of the lowest labor participation rates in history, particularly for men. 1 out of 5 men without a high school degree are out of the workforce. And mobility has been decreasing, right? Only 9% of Americans in the top quintile today were born to parents in the bottom quintile. Compared to that number in the OECD is like 17%. Actually, being born in Canada rather than in the US nearly doubles a child's chance of moving from the bottom to the top quintile. So no surprise that the American dream, the idea that hard work pays off, is also in crisis. And I think we all see it contributing to the sense that the system does not work for me, for many folks, or it's rigged against me. And then we got this pandemic, right? That we all have seen the effects of the pandemic being highly skewed, right? It's been called the inequality pandemic. Women, workers of color, low-wage workers have been hit the hardest. And as this graph shows, it will have lingering effects, right? We are rebounding, but not everyone will rebound at the same speed or under similar conditions. So when we conceived of the workforce of the future, it was to approach this challenge along with many of you, right? We had a clear focus that we thought the problem has been diagnosed. If anything, it's been overdiagnosed, right? Every regional leader knew of this divergence between regions and between peoples and growing inequality and shrinking middle class. But they're asking, what do I do differently? If I want to drive this inclusive growth that we talk about, what does it mean? What do I have to do? So we wanted to provide a very rich data-driven guide to answer these questions that was place specific. And we had to answer questions around 3 buckets. One is the demand side. How do I grow in a way that creates better jobs? And in a post-COVID world, how do you recover from a contraction or from this contraction or build back better? On the supply side, how do you help workers transition to higher paying jobs? And today, more than ever, the question will be, how do I get back into the workforce or recover from dislocation? Because dislocation, if anything, is going to be a constant. And third is, what are the policies and the scaffolding that can make these transitions feasible? Affordable housing, transport, childcare, the portability of those benefits, which will continue to be important. So this is the path. And to give you an example of what this looks in action, let me give you, focus in. So this is the growth piece, right? And we use kind of network-based predictive models, which we used in the international sphere, developed at Harvard's Growth Lab, where I worked for almost a decade, and we applied it to US cities, right? So we worked to provide each city a map of the industries that are feasible, that are built on your existing strengths, that are strategic, that's the y-axis, that basically leverage or that use capabilities that include talent that can be shared with other complex industries, so that if those industries tend to appear, then other industries are likely to appear and you accelerate growth. But then we added different dimensions. And here we show one, which is whether these industries are able to provide good jobs for people without BAs. This here is the picture of Boise. And just to again give you a more tangible example, Boise, like many other cities, have seen tremendous growth. And there were industries like technology and software that were budding and were growing, but also, and that required a lot new talent for them to continue to grow. But actually, when they brought in and attracted Chobani, a yogurt manufacturing, it actually absorbed a bunch of the manufacturing talent as agro processing automated, and it doubled the salaries for many of these workers, right? So it allows you to make these type of choices, not only to understand what's going to grow and decline, but how can you be purposeful in the kind of industries that are likely to grow and decline? Now, that expected growth translates into a set of occupations that you see to the right, that are likely to grow and decline in each city. And here we use location-specific staffing patterns for each industry. And then, we use this database of job-to-job transitions, hundreds of thousands of them, to understand how these occupations that might be growing present opportunities for mobility for folks. And this is what Ian will speak about later. But this shows, like, for a retail worker, what are the occupations based on this transition data that are likely to be upward moves, but are likely to be transitions that others have done in the past, and thus are realistic. And which of these moves will actually bring mobility? And then going back in our little journey, we also have what we call the user journey, which is a qualitative analysis of the points of friction that low-wage workers face in reskilling. And many of you who do this know this well. And lastly, kind of the role of firms and policy in smoothing this path, right? We actually have a new project on ESG metrics for companies, and that can be used for them to encourage internal mobility. And again, on the policy side, I think it's really going to matter in DC as we start seeing many of the stimulus dollars coming out. So let me focus on the issue of mobility, right? And why we think it should be a point of focus. The COVID crisis has produced a unique and asymmetric shock to the labor force, or to the labor market, right? With low wage, low skilled workers bearing the brunt of job losses. So we use this job-to-job transition database to allow us to show that today's unemployed workers may find it harder than in the past to find new jobs and advance through the labor market, right? The labor market's ability to absorb displaced workers into in-demand jobs is at its lowest since 2003. So the crisis is creating some narrow opportunities, right, in digital heavy occupations. And while this might open the door for some low-wage workers, our job-to-job transition shows that the hardest hit occupations, waiters, bartenders, teachers, personal aides, have not historically offered path into occupations that have added jobs in recent months. And we have certain occupations that are better than others, right? It reinforced a finding in our earlier work on realism about reskilling that not all low-wage occupations offer the same mobility. Some occupations are dead ends. So here we see telemarketers make low wages, but they tend to see much more mobility than, let's say, cashiers or preschool teachers. Many of them with bachelor's degrees that tend to get stuck. So this finding is what motivated us going deeper into understanding mobility and trying to understand it in a way that we could think about solutions. So we created this network of occupations where every node is an occupation and it's linked by workers move between them, right? So in looking at the labor market as a network, and this is part of our new findings, we understand where, how workers' opportunities for mobility, where they exist, and how their opportunities for reemployment may change as certain occupations grow and decline. And also, how to think about policy that can be more targeted and built upon workers' previous experiences. So in this network, the distance between occupations is determined by the transition rates among them. So this is to give you a bit of an example of what this looks like, right? And surprisingly, occupations that require similar skill sets tend to be close to each other in this network. But the network also captures things that we can't see or measure as easily, right? That drive transitions, like worker preferences, job availability, licensing requirements, and all the intangible, hard to measure factors that help or hinder mobility. So here we have, HVAC technicians are close to construction laborers and carpenters. Customer service representatives tend to become admin assistants or vice versa. Now, this network approach, I think, led to a couple findings that we found compelling. One is that clusters, actually we measured 15 clusters emerge, which are derived through a detection algorithm that partitions the network into these mutually exclusive groups. So I want to emphasize that this clustering depends only on workers' transitions. It's not something that we push. The clusters emerged based on workers that tend to move within certain occupations. So, we didn't tell the algorithm anything about wage, gender, etc. And yet we clearly see some wage groups, as well as other ways in which the labor market clusters. So in an idealized labor market, I guess we would see that everyone can start in a low wage occupation and advance through higher wage work by learning more about their fields and specializing. So some of these clusters that you see over here to be longer show that, right? It has some low wage occupations, but you can move within it into high wage occupations. And we see that kind of dynamic in certain clusters like sales and management. Healthcare is a particularly wide cluster, business clusters, where you see a high wage variance, people transitioning to higher paying jobs, within the cluster. But by contrast, we see these 5 clusters of low wage that have very small wage variance. And we're calling these the sandpit clusters. And they reflect the fact that low wage work is sticky and that many low wage workers spend their careers actually cycling from one low paying job to the next. And, to illustrate this point, cleaning services, one of these clusters, employs a number of mid and late career workers stuck in low wage work. Actually, 51% of workers in that cluster are above age 45, right? And which is the highest of any cluster. And let me show you another finding, which is that the longer you stay in these sandpit clusters, the harder it is to escape. Actually, on your 10th year in one of these clusters of, cleaning, hospitality, basically on your 10th year, the chance of moving from low wage to high wage is a mere 2%. So I think there's deep implications for policy of this, right? That if you're in a sandpit cluster, you can't just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So while we should work and aspire to actually help low-wage workers do this transition, and I think it's what many of us do, we need to think about policies that provide a minimum set of benefits and living wage for these workers. So this is the first time that we try this metaphor, and you guys can tell me later of where it works. But we're imagining this network as a small city, right, where each cluster is a building, and the highest paid occupations are located on the highest floors. Workers' experiences and career prospects are powerfully shaped by the building where they work. So some even entry-level jobs are in skyscrapers, right, built on hilltops, with escalators and elevators offering workers ample opportunity to reach the top floors. And those are the clusters I mentioned. Sales and management, business, engineering are in such buildings. But many more are squeezed in these squat buildings in deep valleys with broken staircases or low ceilings and few exit doors or pathways to move to more promising opportunities. And any flood can affect those below sea level. Now, within this network or within this small city of ours, there are gateway jobs. These are the cable cars. And actually, these are jobs that move from sandpit clusters to other clusters. And these jobs tend to be in construction, repair workers, general managers, technicians. And they're also stepping stone jobs. These are our names as of now, which is we create a stepping stone index for every occupation. And we measure workers' ability to pass through that occupation on the way from low wage to high wage jobs. So occupations, for example, that have a high stepping stone index are administrative assistants, Salesforce managers, HR clerks, logistics workers. And you can imagine it, right? Administrative assistants tended to be jobs that actually hired from a broad sense of folks and backgrounds, and tend to be the entry into white collar jobs that then moved up inside of a firm. So these stepping stone jobs, to be the bearer of another finding that we found quite compelling, is that these stepping stone jobs are expected to decline faster as a share of employment than non-stepping stone jobs. So it means we have to focus on creating new ones, right? Whether this is going to be the new IT analyst or Salesforce manager. And I think there is a big role for firms as well as for for NGOs and other members of society to think about how to help broaden these new entry-level jobs and make them stepping stone jobs, making that IT assistant what administrative assistants used to be. Now, what they have been, although they've become conduit of opportunity, race and gender affect mobility, not only in the whole labor market, but also within these occupations that we care about. So when we look at upward mobility, we see that female, Black, and Hispanic workers also face lower rates of upward mobility when they switch occupations. About 52% of white workers' transitions tend to be upward, compared to 44% and 41% for Black and Hispanic workers, respectively. These mobility gaps lessen when you include education, but they actually persist even when we account for education level. We also see the gaps between industries, which we think could be helpful for companies to actually benchmark themselves and try to improve these numbers. So in this example, manufacturing, for example, sees a difference in the rate of upward mobility between Black and white workers is as high as 14 percentage points. Now, in other sectors, it's smaller. Notably in education and government sectors, upward mobility between Black and white workers is somewhat similar. The gap in hospitality and retail tends to be small, but actually mobility in these sectors is quite low in total. And the last insight or finding that I wanted to show you is that we were trying to think, how can we think about these gaps in a way that they're actionable? And we think that if you look at them at the occupation level, they can become more actionable. And here is the example of one of these common and growing jobs. And just focus on the licensed practical nurses. This is a high stepping stone job, which folks use as a way to move to registered nurses, which is a higher paying job. But these pathways are traveled much less frequently by Black and Hispanic workers. Actually, the rate in which a licensed practical nurse becomes a registered nurse is twice as high if you're a Black worker compared to whether you're a white worker compared to being Black or Hispanic. We see similar gaps in other jobs like, tax preparer becoming accountants. That number tends to be halved when you account for Hispanic women, let's say. So I think narrowing the analysis at this level allows us to find where the bottlenecks exist and where both firms and other actors can actually narrow their focus. And with that, let me pass it to Ian to talk about the tool, because with the tool we were trying to focus on what we thought was an urgent need in this pandemic, which is helping dislocated workers who are going to be entering back in the workforce, not only to come into the workforce, but find opportunities for upward mobility.
Thank you. So as Marcel described, we believe that workers, firms, and policymakers each have an important role in bolstering economic mobility, and we're interested in finding and sharing these pathways with as much granularity as possible. So we developed our mobility pathways tool to help all of these groups harness the relevant data and expand opportunities for mobility and growth. Using hundreds of thousands of observed job transitions, plus real-time jobs postings data and local wage data, users can compare different occupations by wage level, current demand, and a mobility index, which is a new indicator that we constructed based on millions of resumes that tells whether people in certain occupations go on to earn higher wages subsequently. So in this example, suppose that the workforce development organization is advising someone with previous experience in retail sales, who's maybe looking for new opportunities for reemployment. We show that the past retail sales workers have traveled over the last 20 years. Obviously, one of the most common transitions that retail sales workers make is into other retail sales jobs. And that's easy to understand. Someone working at J. Crew can easily go to work at the Gap. The second most common transition is to become a supervisor of retail sales work. We show that demand for this occupation has been relatively stable over the last year. So it's still a viable pathway. More common recently has been the transition to stock clerk and order filling. Many people have made that transition to work in warehouses during the pandemic. And that's reflected there by that green arrow showing that demand for that occupation has been surging. The best option might be to go into becoming a sales representative where wages are high and people go on to earn higher wages indicated by that positive mobility index. However, demand for that occupation has been down over the last year. Using this tool, people can also explore transitions and their differences locally. So here in Atlanta, for example, we show that cashiers and customer sales representatives have relatively higher demand than that in the rest of the country. And what's neat about this app is that it has a ton of applications, and some of which we're only starting ourselves to discover. For example, on the next slide, we were contacted by a manufacturer of toilets and also more recently bidets. Their biggest constraint is that there aren't enough people to install their products as quickly as they can manufacture them. So here we have a company looking for how they can nudge reskilling programs, local training providers to train more plumbers. But while the demand for plumbing has surged, the pathways to becoming a plumber are, you could say, clogged. On the other hand, the demand for plumbing is up. What we show on the next slide is that demand for many of the industries that employ plumbers and related occupations is down. So construction is stable, but all these other industries that employ plumbers and their related occupations are seeking fewer workers than they were prior to the pandemic. So if someone is looking to train and recruit plumbers, they may find some by targeting workers in these industries. And similarly, the tool can be used to identify pathways into high-tech or more digitally intensive jobs. And it can reveal some pathways that are maybe unintuitive. For example, it might be obvious that network systems analysts often become computer scientists, but you might not have guessed that one of the other occupations that frequently become computer scientists is computer and office machine repairers. There's something about that occupation and its close connection to technology, maybe that perhaps allows, with some reskilling, people to make this drastically upward transition. And these are really the pathways that we want to help identify and encourage. And so this is the start. We've seen a lot of interest, and we want to keep building it with the most updated sense of the labor market and current demand. But really our focus is not just on showing the data, but showing in a way that companies, reskilling organizations, policymakers, even workers themselves can really use it to drive impact and to see more mobility.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcel and Ian. I want to pick up on the discussion part of the session today and really pick up where you left off, Ian, because much of this tool is based on the history of the pathways of mobility, right? And I want to know, for the benefit of our group today, how much has COVID affected those pathways, right? The example you gave around plumbers and the sort of heightened need for this profession. Have the occupational demands shifted, and does this tool have kind of real-time data that acknowledges those shifts in demand, but also have any of the pathways shifted because of the disruptions created over the last year from the pandemic?
So we think that by using these historical transitions, we're picking up something kind of essential about the labor market, the connectedness of these occupations, and as Marcella mentioned, the more intangible factors, the preferences that people have, the credentialing barriers that might exist. But to answer your question, by incorporating this real-time changes in demand, people can see how viable those pathways are. Plus, add to that local information on job growth, and you can get a really detailed sense of what might be available in a certain area.
Excellent. Well, look, I have a ton of questions, but I get to talk to you all the time. So I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues and our guests today. What would you like to ask Ian and Marcella about this tool? And also, what are your thoughts about how you might be able to use this in your work, whether you're a funder or a workforce development professional or a researcher? How could you put this to work for what you need? Feel free to raise your hand, either literally, because I can see you all, or on the chat. Yeah, Roy, I see your hand, and then we'll go to Todd.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting to see the preschool down at the bottom there of the occupations, because it just brought to mind that a lack of mobility and the transition may not be directly related to the importance to society of an occupation. And that the barriers that we see are employers who won't pay preschool people, the lack of standards in preschools, which affect most of the people who are teaching the children in preschools are only high school educated. And that now we have the Biden administration saying we're going to give 3 and 4-year-olds public education, which may increase the salary because they'll go into the systems where they'll be paid, because these private preschools, which is the predominant way in which 3 and 4-year-olds are educated, will not pay. And the individuals who are in those situations have children, they have bills, and so they have no time to go beyond that high school education in this regard. So I think this data really brings up an issue that even though one may not have transition ability and may be considered in the low level, we have to create policies that make these things more important, and eventually educational level and wages increase. As an economist, how do we look at this system to try to do some of these things without just looking at the pure data and say, well, that's a low-level job. They need to go be a computer scientist. Well, computer science isn't the only thing that runs this country and society.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's exactly why we're looking into this issue this way, and I think folks that know each of these occupations deeply, like what you were saying, what are the levers that actually determine the fact that preschool teachers, we were surprised that preschool teachers were in this dead end, low wage and low mobility, which was actually different than teachers. Teachers also have low mobility, but they were actually much higher paid. And, to be honest, we're less worried about those jobs. Mobility, who cares if you're making, if it's low, if you're making a good salary. And that the real structural issues that actually sometimes even escape education, that have people stuck there. So in each of these policies are going to be different. And again, one of the findings, knowing that we doubled down on these clusters, is the fact that we need to aspire to create mobility, but this will be hard for many of these clusters. So we need to think of alternative policies that make that profession more so as important as education, ones that are, stable, have benefits and a living wage.
Yeah, I really agree. And I'm so glad that you're looking at it, because I think we could say the same thing about nursing home personnel and assisted living personnel, where there's probably a mismatch between competency and what they're required to do and what they're paid. But the owners are getting to be millionaires and the workers are on food stamps. And this economic divide has really got to be looked at as to how we can facilitate a more equity kind of a system here in the occupations.
Yeah, really well said, Roy. Thank you. Todd, and then Naria, and then Gayatri.
Yeah, so let me just second Roy's point. And of course, I'm very much interested in how we are able to put this tool to use. And I do think that the discussion that we just had, even using that example, is a great opportunity for us to have some serious discussions around how we value these positions. But really my question, and both a comment, is that I'm wondering if the authors and tool creators have thought specifically about the various stakeholders who will be able to use these tools and how. So for example, you indicated workforce development practitioners, you talked about policymakers and other stakeholders. I know that I would also imagine or include as part of that economic development practitioners, I would include them as part of that as well. And so I'd like, not necessarily as part of this call, but at some point, I'd really like to maybe take a deep dive in terms of how you would imagine each of these stakeholders using the tool. But then the other part, I think, is just very interesting to me, and that is, how do we imagine the stakeholder group that is most likely to benefit from this type of intelligence? And is there a way to present this in a way that can inform that low-wage worker or that individual who might be in this position in a way that resonates with them and provides them opportunities to think differently about their career and career choices and what's available in training, et cetera. So just curious about that.
No, these are great questions and very much linked to our thinking. We're Brookings. We are not, you are our audience in a way, people who are closer to the ground that are going to deal directly with workers. And when I gave the example of Wendy, who I think joined recently, it was her in mind saying, low-wage workers are not going to come to Brookings' tool, but could this help her coaches, right? Guide them with real-time data, but in a way that is not just presenting data. A lot of people do that, but presenting data in a way that pushes opportunity, right? We think firms could use this data. As Ian was explaining, there's still, even right now with so much dislocation, there are firms saying, I can't get enough network administrators, enough cybersecurity, enough IT analysts. And we want to show them, look, you actually can train these folks within your companies that are likely to be successful in that. And we think that like with our plumbing example, can actually spur economic mobility. We are hoping at the next level also to make this data available. So if folks want to include it in the many tools that are existing, they have kind of the state-of-the-art transition data that we've been cleaning on this so that they can plug them into their systems. Next, where we're hoping to go next is where we started, which is the economic development piece. We are also hoping to visualize that Boise slide that I showed you to say in every city, what are the industries that are going to grow and decline based on my not only my status quo, the industries that I have now, but what if I'm purposeful and I want to grow this industry? What are the implications for labor there? And we've created a testing tool for Texas to do exactly that, to say, what would absorb my current displaced workers so that I can focus my industrial policy a little bit more on the industrial side. So we're hoping to add to this tool the industry piece that leads to the growth and decline of industries. So you can have both sides.
And Todd, we can certainly talk offline about this, but there are other tools that we have invested and funded that are more worker facing, that take this kind of data and put it in the hands. There's one in particular that we're piloting in France right now that tries to put in the hands of workers these pathways so that they can get digital coaching and they can sort of find what their next job is. But I want to go to Narya, then Gayatri, and Alex. So Narya, you're up.
Oh yeah, great conversation. And I definitely think, to answer the question, Parag, about how would we use, I think kind of similarly, if we could provide this to our nonprofit partners and all their coaches, and if there was like playbook or some kind of enablement tool related to that, that would be great. My question was just, Ian, when you were presenting about, just look, you touched on a few of the interventions that we're really focused on in funding, but I'm just wondering, how those showed up. Like, was there did you take a look at whether like certs or additional training actually made a difference or accelerated transitions? Just kind of a general question about the intervention piece.
I see all the faces nodding because that I think is such a crucial question. When people ask us, so well, where's this reskilling? Does it matter? Of course it matters. But the point is that you have to be targeted for it to matter. The goal has to be a transition toward a higher paying job, particularly to low wage workers, and understanding what credentials actually matter to make that jump and which ones might be a waste of time. And we can't waste these workers' time. Like, the opportunity cost of their time is probably the highest, right? So in Texas, and hopefully also in Colorado, we're trying to get that data. And I think folks have it at different levels to say, when does this educational actually allow for that leap? And usually these two words are disconnected. We know we provide education, we track people when they leave, but we don't know what the difference was, or we know it at a very narrow level. So far, we've gotten to the point of saying, these are what the market tells us. These are the occupations that are growing, both in your locality based on long-term trends and short-term postings. And these are the jobs that are highly mobile and that could absorb your displaced workers. So at least it gives a sense of focus for reskilling organizations and community colleges, because as somebody mentioned, we might make community college cheap or free, but what it does really matters. So we're after that, and I'm sure other players here are making progress in that direction too.
And as we talk about the users of this tool, in addition to workforce development professionals, obviously policymakers and funders can do a lot with this data in terms of deciding where to prioritize. Our next question comes from somebody who is both. Gayatri is from Walmart.org and also a city councilwoman. So Gayatri, go ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks, Parag. This is really phenomenal. So thank you guys for your research. I'm going to try to ask this quickly. So let me give you a quick example and then try to figure out how or if that fits within the tool. So Walmart, in partnership with Walmart.org, have been thinking about this, right? Like, how do you turn what have historically been called bad jobs into better jobs or stepping stone jobs? I really like that term. We launched an internal reskilling initiative that allows cashiers to become plumbers, which is a good example out of what you just showed us. The problem is that there's no history of that, right? So it's exactly what you just said. It's an intentional targeting of someone who has the potential to move in and ideally desire to become a plumber, but the data, the history, the evidence, if we look backwards, doesn't tell us that that's a logical path. But Walmart has 5,000 stores and we need a bunch of plumbers and we can't find them. So there's this opportunity to map a combination of need with not really proximate skills. We're not targeting these workers because they have skills that would predisposition them to be good plumbers, but they already work for us and we need the plumbers. So I'm trying to nestle how this research, which is incredibly helpful to see, doesn't stifle the potential to rethink innovation in reskilling, because it could also send a message. If retail jobs are bad jobs, then you don't go to Walmart to become a plumber, right? Like I'm trying to.
No, I love what you're saying, because so different tools, different things for different things. I think it's really important to have this pathways actually to show that certain things you didn't expect, actually happen and actually are pathways that people create. And we're definitely lining people up for those that are upward, right? However, where we're trying to go now with these new fundings and the work is to say, some of these jobs are decreasing. We got to create new ones, right? And we know that plumbers are, in demand, high-wage jobs, they're becoming more tech jobs, and there are other structural reasons of why there are not enough plumbers. Either, it has a bad rep, people don't want to associate with them, and actually folks that go deeper into understanding those barriers of why people are not becoming and create them, I think it's totally part of the solution. And that's, we want to signal these kinds of examples, like that we are going to have to create new pathways. We're going to create new jobs that are right now not stepping stone jobs and turn them into stepping stone jobs. And that requires, a Walmart, a Mastercard saying, hey, that IT analyst that I said requires a BA, and maybe I can try to be more inclusive in who do I bring in, and giving them extra, support. So that's not the past. That's what should be in the future. So we think different data can be used for different things, and we hope to make sure we make that difference in talking about it, because what you talk about is very important.
Alex and then Simon.
Thank you, Parag, and thank you, everyone. This is, just so phenomenal. And speaking as an organization that, or for an organization that eats, sleeps, and breathes the implementation of this stuff day to day, I cannot wait to be able to spend more time with the data. I have a bajillion questions, but I'll try and keep it short. Two thoughts, really. One is, how does the team think sort of emerging professions might factor into analysis like this? So to give you a really concrete example, a generation thinking a lot about green jobs. And what we're finding is that's still very much an emergent area. And some of these are truly new jobs that haven't existed before. So it's harder to get to grips on what are the potential pathways, and it feels more piecemeal than, say, getting a grip on what are the pathways into tech, which we do a lot of work on. And I'm curious to know how some of those more truly emergent professions might be reflected in this data. Also, to understand, and a big plus one to Maria's point around implementation, I think there's a really interesting use case here to sort of look at what are the interventions that have been available to folks on a very individual level. And is it around training? Is it around cert? Is it around interventions that help them build their social network capital, which we know is so important for transitioning into new careers? And is there a way to get a handle on what that landscape looks like by geography, and then look at the transitions by geography and say, okay, well, actually the social network capital is proving really powerful here, but training and certification is proving really powerful here. And that could, as an implementing organization, really guide, I think, our work in a way that very much builds on our main source of input right now, which is direct feedback from the learners and direct feedback from the employers.
I'll try and answer the first one, and I think the second one's harder, so I'll pass it to Marcel.
No, go Ian. Just to say that this is not only, we'll try to answer part of it, but this is giving us really great ideas of where to go next.
I think you're spot on about the emerging jobs. And one of the drawbacks of using 20 years of data is that the jobs that are emerging today didn't exist 20 years ago. So of course, we have to harmonize the data so that they all match. But that leaves us wondering about new jobs. So I think the next thing that we have to do is to look at job titles, even rather than occupations, because they're more specific and there's a fair amount of variation within them. But fortunately, I think we can start using some of our resume data to look more closely at the narrower and emerging jobs. Marcella, go ahead for the skills and local. I think I think, like I said, we're trying to capture something that's about the labor market nationally, and then go deeper into local areas based on job availability and current demand and expected growth. Yeah.
And as long as you guys are soliciting ideas, just to build on what Alex said, we heard President Biden say at the joint address to Congress last week that we need to shift from a fossil fuel system to a green energy system. We know that for people in coal country, that's going to require massively reskilling people and putting them into better jobs. And so in the same way you did a deep dive in Idaho, it would be interesting to do a deep dive in coal country, places like West Virginia, where the politics of this is going to be very, very important in how we handle it, and figuring out, okay, what are the existing pathways that the data shows for people in the coal mining profession? And then also, what are the new pathways that might emerge? Can a coal miner suddenly become a wind turbine engineer or worker? And that's, I think, going to influence, because this is not just about telling policymakers what has worked, it's also about pointing a pathway to what could work.
This is a great point, and one that actually originally motivated this work. You've heard me say this a lot, Parag, when we were saying, can we tell that steel worker that they could become a plumber, and they don't need to, that software engineer or coder is not necessarily the only option, right? And I think it might actually not only, gives us these paths, but might inform, and we just wrote a small piece on this absorption index on the infrastructure plan for Biden. So there's going to be a lot of money in infrastructure, as with everything else, but it'll be up to local policymakers as to what to prioritize and how to prioritize. So we all want broadband, we all want wind turbines, but if you're in Pennsylvania and, plugging orphaned oiled wells, which produce a ton of methane and are terrible for the environment, is something that could absorb quite quickly those fossil fuel workers, right? So having these notions of absorption as we think about how to prioritize so that people don't fall off the workforce when coal plants close, I think should be part of the equation. And we're trying to inform that a little bit using the same transition data.
Yeah. And Wendy, I see your comment in the chat. We should definitely have further brainstorming conversation. As Marcella was talking, I was thinking a lot about your model at Generation, which is how do we make that transition faster, right? Rather than moving the steel worker or the coal miner into being a plumber over a period of 2 years, can we shorten it down to 12 weeks and get them into these high demand jobs while the demand is hot? So definitely, let's take you up on that offer. I want to go over to Simon, and then we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. So Simon,
Yeah, echo everyone else, really incredible information and engagement. Really appreciate being part of it. One question and then a comment. One is around the data. As a regional intermediary ourselves in Southern California, updated, accurate data is so important. And that's part of the ongoing challenge with creating upskilling and training programs is the data tends to be 2 or 3 years old, and by that time, of course, is not as relevant. So I guess my question is about the frequency of that data and accuracy, and because it is incredibly useful. And the other is just a comment about using these kinds of tools. And I say this more from a provider perspective. We operate publicly funded job centers, and those resources, and everyone here knows this, have declined over the last few decades to a point where we're being asked to do so much with so little. So utilizing these innovative resources, particularly when we're trying to reach certain communities that have been left out of this service delivery and out of these services for so long, it's just flagging that as a system, that the resources to use these tools and to impact those communities, equitable economic recovery is so important. And so I just, wanted to flag that. And Gayatri, I saw your note about the system seem wired against stepping stones, and that's absolutely true. As a service delivery provider, the resources to upskill people just aren't there. It just hasn't been a priority. And so this is really incredible. But again, the resources to actually deliver on this and to help those people move out of poverty, to move out of those entry-level positions is just so critical.
We understand definitely the importance of real-time data and even if we can forward-looking data. And so we're working to keep this updated every month or every 2 months with real-time job postings data. And we're also going to start looking forward into thinking about building predictions for which occupations are maybe growing in a local area. And on the second question, I think part of our job, in addition to building these data tools that people can use, is also about increasing public awareness and drawing attention to the fact that there is a strong need for more resources for this kind of service provision.
And a final comment on that last phrase from Ian is that whole piece that I just showed, one little bucket on the user journey. we want to bring attention to the fact that the labor market is not frictionless, right? That it's not just you create jobs, you create a demand shock with infrastructure, and that's going to translate to opportunity. And more so for low-wage workers, it requires all that scaffolding or that hand-holding. It requires a lot more work to reach the hardest folks. And that's not cheap, right? And if we go cheap, then we go for the easiest to reach. And those are usually the ones that don't need our help. So we are trying to bring with this data also the fact that if you want to unlock the difference between why certain people are moving, not moving, you've got to go there and invest a lot. But we think it definitely will pay off. But that focus is a bit of, you know, the idea of all of this work.
Yeah, look, I know there's more comments and questions, and I want to acknowledge, Roy, your comments in the chat. We definitely need more conversation about how to tie this data and the tool to the training conversation, to the credentialing, the certification conversation. We're absolutely with you on this. And Justin, I see your hand up. We're out of time, but I'm going to give Marcella a chance to just tell us some next steps, what's going to happen going from here, your plans, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll follow up with you all after this.
Our plan is we have a lot of plans, and actually we have in this call Greg Wright, who will hopefully join us at the Workforce of the Future soon, and maybe Greg wave, but where we're hoping to go next is try to go deeper on these occupations of who moves and who doesn't. The focus, the reskilling on what a high value credential is for low wage workers. We want to understand how infrastructural means opportunity in that answers somebody's question. Make this data available broadly. We want to understand SMEs. What about industry structure are going to allow, you know, small and medium-sized companies to actually thrive, and what are the levers for that? And we're focusing on firm level practices. We have a new set of, you know, metrics for the S that can actually measure the things that we care about, mobility and wage growth, and kind of gather the set of practices there. So hopefully more to come. And then we're going to build these tools. We're going to add to this tool the industry piece, and hopefully the demographic piece is also in our goals, continuing this mobility work.
And Marcella, what's next for you?
We don't know, but so I've been nominated.
I think we do know. I read a press release about it.
No, yeah. So I've been asked to go back into the administration to work in the job that I left, and actually motivated me to do all this which was in international development, leading Latin America for USAID, dealing, you know, having someone to point the finger to with all these issues in the southern border. But I'm very, I still need to be approved by the Senate. It'll take months, and I'm very invested in this work that is really gaining momentum to continue to provide insight. So we'll see, but with all of you guys as partners, we hope that this you know, keeps helping folks as they need it.
Thank you. Well, service knows no sector. We congratulate you, Marcella. We look forward to working with you while we have you. And Ali, my colleague at Mastercard, who has been shepherding this relationship with the Brookings Institution, I'll let you have the final word.
Thanks, Parag. Well, I had all sorts of takeaways to share with you all, but I think that will be summarized in an email for you. But that's only because we had a fantastic dynamic conversation. There's a lot of engagement. So, you know, call to action. We want all your ideas for how to bring this, you know, to workforce development organizations and to workers themselves. And we look forward to working with you all. Thank you so much to Marcella and Ian for the fantastic work and continued partnership. Thank you to Parag for the fantastic moderation, and to Jenny for helping us make this event a success behind the scenes. And I think with that, we will officially close out the session. So have a wonderful day, and we will be in touch.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.